Right.
Have you been to the dentist, Ian?
Recording has started, gentlemen. Recording has started. Sorry, it's my laptop. So,
Ian, have you been to the dentist?
sorry, can you all hear me?
Yeah, can you hear us? I don't think he can hear us.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you both. Yes.
Okay. That's good. That's good.
I was asking if you've been to the dentist,
cool.
Ian.
Sorry, what were you saying, Ian?
Have you been to the dentist?
No. Why are my teeth very white?
No. No, it sounds like you've had an injection of Novocaine in your gums.
I was when you were both speaking, it sounded like you were in a fishbowl with feedback, but hopefully it's all right now.
Okay. Let's do this.
Okay. Right, we are live.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Ian, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, we are. Just posting an article.
Well, no, we are not live. We are recording. We're not live.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you today. Good to see my good mates, Steve and Ian, on the channel again. So it's been a while. We've all been extremely busy. Lots been happening, obviously, on the Israel-Iran front. I've been focusing, as usual, on the kind of Russia-Ukraine front more than most things. And today's been a momentous damp squib in terms of Trump's latest big announcement, which really wasn't an announcement at all, in which he kicked the can of secondary tariffs down the road for another 50 days. My take on that, which was in my article in Responsible Statecraft today, was he's been backed into the corner again by lawmakers on the Hill, just like he was, in fact, back in 2017 during his first term in office, coming into power, keen to kind of reset things with Russia, get things back with Ukraine, and meeting the kind of cold winds of resistance from the Hill and finding himself outmaneuvered, which is exactly the situation he's found himself in today. So depressing, quite frankly, and actually I think it shows that he's increasingly kind of weak and powerless on ending the Ukraine war, which is very, very worrying. But over to my two chums for their thoughts.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, Ian. I've been watching both the Iran-Israel thing and Trump and Ukraine, and it just seems to me that he's fallen into the same trap he did with Iran. You know, he was told with Iran that it was going to be a knockover, and they quickly get a regime change in the way. That didn't work out, and it feels to me like those people who are advising him have said the same thing about the Lindsey Graham talking the same thing about the 500% sanctions and re-engaging. So what he's essentially doing is re-engaging, but without the right tools. When you look at what he's deploying militarily, it's mostly defensive stuff, and when it comes to the air defense missiles, it falls under the title not enough. So I think it's going to make very, very little impact on the battlefield. In fact, almost no impact on the battlefield. But actually, what it will do is it'll make him look like he is re-engaging, and at the end of 50 days, I suspect that that niet means niet still means niet.
Da.
Yeah, I agree, and for fear of repeating myself at the end of the last podcast, I believe there's a bigger agenda here. You've got Trump, who wants to get out of forever wars, but doesn't know how to do that, but does know how to start new wars and how to fund them and all the rest of it, which we know. We watch the genocide in real time, unfortunately, online. Mm. But the bigger agenda, I think, is Israel. I mean, was he the Supreme Allied Commander, General Wesley Clark? He said in 2001 that he popped into the Pentagon to say hi to his former team, and they briefed him and said, look, we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, and that has come to pass. 6 of those countries America has gone to war with, and the last one on the list is the biggie, which is Iran. And this is at the behest of the Zionist government in Israel. So, you know, Trump clearly doesn't want war. I don't know Trump. All I know about Trump is what I see, what I read, and there's not too much difference between them, I'm afraid. But who does know Trump is Colonel Douglas McGregor. And he always says, you know, and I trust Colonel McGregor's judgment. He says, I know Trump, I like Trump, I trust his judgment, and he is generally anti-war. The problem is surrounded by neocons who want war for all other reasons. And he's just caught in that trap. So his gut instinct or his natural instinct is to be against war. But unfortunately, he's going to be trapped in forever wars with Iran. And, you know, and Iran is no Libya or no Iraq. They can fight back, as Israel has found out. And that's the problem. It's going to continue. It's very depressing.
Do you think the problem is also that actually he's surrounded by yes men, people who won't tell him that he's got no clothes on in the Oval Office? He has no strategy. So I mean, because I think you look at people like JD Vance. JD Vance's whole kind of strategy, it seems to me, is to be so pro-Trump that he builds himself up as the kind of Trump legacy candidate in the next presidential elections. I mean, that seems to me JD Vance's only game in town, to violently agree with absolutely everything President Trump does. Now, politically, that may be a good strategy for him if Trump's power base kind of swells on the back of whatever policies he pursues over the next 4 years. But it's also actually very dangerous in terms of taking away any possibility of challenge. You look at other kind of characters like Hegseth, he also appears like a total yes man as well. Yeah. And, you know, when Trump asks for some big solution, some knock 'em dead solution to the nuclear problem in Iran, then Hegseth will kind of guarantee success and then not ultimately be able to deliver or own the responsibility for that. So I think partly the challenge here is a lack of accountability and Trump actually, in addition to the neocons, being surrounded by yes men. What do you guys think?
I think I was sort of had more hope than I'm starting to think now for Vance, but also for Tracy Gabbard, because they seem to me to be a little bit more sensible. And I'd read Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, which is very well written. He's a very clever man, but also listened to him in some of the congressional hearings. He did one where he was sort of almost an overnighter, almost on his own, but he was very cautious about Russia. So that made me sort of feel a little bit more positive. However, there's no sign of that in the action, with one exception, which was that when they were talking about the Iran attack, Vance came out and said this isn't against the Iranian nuclear facilities, not against the Iranian people. And I thought that was interesting that he should say that. Maybe wonder what was going on inside. But I think the change for me is that I don't think Israel can win this war. And I also don't think Israel and America can win this war. So it's a lost war. And what's more interesting is that actually if the war does kick off again, and it wouldn't surprise me if Netanyahu kicks it off with the help of the AIPAC lobby, that I think Israel could get decimated. I think they were quite close to being in really, really deep trouble. They're a small country, vulnerable economically, and without a weapon system which can intercept all of the range of missiles that can be fired at them. It's something I predicted before it happened, so it didn't entirely surprise me. It didn't surprise me at all that actually it was 12 days and they were starting to say we need to stop this. But what would be interesting is what advice that they're getting internally in Israel and also in the Pentagon. Because unless Trump's prepared to go onto the ground in Iran at scale, and when I'm talking at scale, we're talking million plus, so that's doubling the size of the American army, then I don't think they can win it. And I think actually, even if it were to start off again, then Israel is in great danger of being almost fatally damaged.
Well, a little bit of gossip. I have put it out on social media on my Twitter feed. Two sources within the MOD, one within the army, at a high level, and also a very high level in the RAF, both said that Israel is prepared to use tactical nukes to hit the Iranian nuclear facility. And some of the guys further down the food chain that I speak to, and plebs like me, by the way, so that's not disrespecting them, I disrespect myself. I've said, yeah, that he's crazy enough. They believe he's crazy enough to do that for the greater cause, if that makes sense. I personally believe that as well. And that's obviously very, very worrying because we just blindly support them. And that's the problem.
But don't
No
you
one's
think
held
that'd
to
make
account.
Israel? Do you think that would make Israel an international pariah, though, to have it completely unsanctioned by the Americans? Because I can't really see the Americans signing off on this use of any sort of a nuclear warhead against Iran. I can imagine. I can well imagine that Netanyahu is crazy enough to, to contemplate that, but to do that without the kind of consent or indeed informing the Americans, beforehand, I think would be devastating for Israel's reputation on the world stage.
I think you're right, Ian. I think it'd be devastating for their reputation. And if it was sanctioned by the Americans, it would be devastating for the American reputation as well. Furthermore, actually, you could use tactical nuclear weapons, but that doesn't stop you being decimated. And if they use nuclear weapons, and I think Iran would think so. If they're going all in against Israel, they'll destroy the place, even with conventional weapons. So you've got to be so. If I were Israel's chief of defense staff, I'd say, look, Netanyahu, this is Prime Minister. The problem here is that we will be decimated, and we don't have the capability to defend ourselves. So you can use a nuclear weapon, but if the Iranians then open up on us, then we'll be in deep trouble, very, very deep trouble. So, in a way, Iran doesn't need a nuclear weapon deterrence because of the nature of the combat situation that Israel currently finds itself in.
And how would Israel escalate, after they use a tactical nuclear weapon against Fordow or something like that? How do you escalate from that? Do you use more tactical nuclear weapons against more civilian sites? It's just that it's a nightmare scenario, I think, especially actually for Israel itself. Because I think that would, in some ways, kind of bring together the Sunni and Shia parts of the Middle East, Iran and Saudi. I think they'd be utterly horrified, by this, and it would actually put the Israelis in a kind of more vulnerable position than they were in the late 1960s.
Yeah. No, I think you go, Ian. You go.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't hear any of that. There was loads of interference at my end. I don't know if that's on the recording or how it works. Yeah. Can you both hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you good. Yeah, I was going to respond in proud, but I think that I said in a podcast with Danny Davis, it would have been about a month or two. I'm going
to turn my Wi-Fi off.
Sure, no problem.
Turn my Wi-Fi off. I don't know if it.
Yeah, I said that one of the dangers, it seemed to me, would be that if Israel were to be substantially weakened, then it's very difficult to look around its boundaries and say, yeah, they're all friendly or all neutral. Turkey's wants to butt into a fight with Israel. But having said that, Erdogan's chancellor, so it wouldn't surprise me if you got to a situation where Iran have so weakened Israel that some might actually start to think in a collective way, Shia and Sunni, this is a time to exercise this cancer from the Middle East, and America will not come in. Well, America could try to come in to help them, but actually it'd be a very difficult situation. I don't think that'll happen, but it wouldn't entirely surprise me if it did.
Yeah, exactly. What role would Egypt play?
You have to forgive me this
as well. You are Ian. Can you hear us? No.
Honestly, at my end, it sounds like you're both underwater. It's like bang, 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 bang. So, yeah, I don't know when to interrupt. I don't know when someone's finished speaking because I just turned my Wi-Fi off, so I'm on my phone. I just thank you. I heard that. You said about Israel being an international pariah. I mean, technically, they're an international pariah now. We can all see online exactly what they're doing every day, all day long. No one's held to account. Journalists can't go in there. And if you criticise them, you're pro-Hamas. I mean, how does that work? I mean, it's just insane. So I just think they literally can do pretty much anything they want, and once they've done it, they'll beg for forgiveness and say that there was an existential threat to the nation of Israel, so they had to do that, and I just think they'll get away with it. Unfortunately, I don't agree with it, obviously, but I do think they'll get away with it.
Well, today was a massive day of apology for the BBC over that documentary that was filmed by the child of a kind of fairly low ranking, by the sounds of things, a Gaza minister, obviously working for Hamas. And that was at the top of the kind of headlines, really, on the news today. The point about the kind of Israeli airstrike that killed 10 people, including 6 children, sort of at a water station, only appeared about 15 minutes into the broadcast. It's quite bizarre. So I kind of worry a bit that actually the BBC, which I think is a totally discredited organisation anyway, that pumps a state propaganda, is just kind of being pulled by the government to churn out some overtly kind of pro-Israel kind of propaganda.
But it's very difficult, don't you think, to understand the deep motivation within the BBC, because they pride themselves on being, well, they're supposed to pride themselves on being a sort of public service broadcast, and they've got BBC Verify. It's about time they started using BBC Verify on quite a few of their own stories and looking for balance. I routinely complain about articles or about things from the BBC, and it just goes into a big vacuum, and it's difficult to understand whether the editors are actually so seduced by the narrative that they're refusing to take any other interpretation, madness of crowds sort of world, or whether actually it is, as you say, and whether or not they're actually being pressurized by the government. So much for free speech, if so.
Yeah, I think ever since Alistair Campbell and his Sexed Up dossier, I've said this many times before, Number 10 tries to exert a cast iron grip on any kind of media narratives going out into the kind of mainstream broadcasters and kind of print news as well. So, and that's with, sort of privately owned media. So don't underestimate the extent to which they can actually influence the narrative of the BBC, which is essentially state-owned kind of media. And I think the BBC kind of tries to give this appearance, balance, but it takes a position on most issues, whether it likes to or not, and it just tries to kind of finesse the presentation of those in the name of balance, using kind of BBC Verified to kind of validate its own kind of Overton window. That's how I see it.
Sorry, I'm back in. I was literally holding my phone. I just couldn't hear you. I'm really sorry. My laptop. I've come in on my laptop now, so hopefully you can hear me, and I'm back in the real world.
We've got 2 Ians now, because on my screen, I know you're at the bottom as well. Briefly, we had 2 of you.
It's good to have a power struggle. It's the only way I could win. It's the only way. But BBC Verify, you'll be delighted to know, blocked me on social media. Obviously, I mean, you know me. I don't shout. I don't swear. I'm never rude and disrespectful. Even if we disagree, we can disagree politely and respectfully, and that's the only way to do it. And all I did was ask them questions. Just ask them polite, respectful questions, and it was easier to block me. I don't expect them to get involved in a debate with me. They've got better things to do, I'm sure. But blocking me is not the solution. That's what I would suggest.
You just can't make this up. And it was Eisenhower who said, all those many years ago as president, he said the most important thing for an effective democracy is a well-informed public. And we have at the moment a Whitehall and Westminster system that is making as sure as it possibly can that our people aren't well informed. And frankly, it's a disgrace.
It's deliberate. It's deliberate.
Yeah. I'm a member of the Free Speech Union. I'm glad that I am. It only cost me $5 a month, but it's a really good thing. But they haven't really got onto this subject yet. And I did just talk to them a little bit about it, and even they looked a bit nervous when I was saying that I had a different view on Ukraine, for example, that
of course
had something to do with history and facts.
Why? Don't let that get in the way of a good story.
I know John Benjamin, who runs the UK Free Speech Union, used to be our man in various places, Chile, Ghana, and Mexico City. Really nice guy. Fell foul of a semi-automatic weapon, unfortunately, towards the end of his posting in Mexico, but a really good guy.
Yeah. It's run by... Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, Steve. I just really couldn't hear you. It was going bloop, bloop, bloop. And in my head, I'm praying that that's not on the audio recording, which talking to you now, it all sounds very clear, which is great. But going back to what the question you posed earlier, Ian, if the Israelis do use a tactical nuke over in Iran on the nuclear facility, for example, what do you think the outcome will realistically be? What will happen? Obviously, everyone will be condemning them. This is outrageous. This is terrible. Don't want to put words in your mouth, but over to you. Over to you both, really.
I think it would be. We briefly touched on this, Steve and I, while you were kind of having technical difficulties. But I think it'd be radically, or having more technical difficulties. I think it'd be radically more difficult for governments like the British government and the American government to keep, without caveat, supporting the Israeli government come what may. I think it'd make it much harder for Starmer in circumstances where he's already having to make illegal any groups that protest against the situation among the Palestinian people. It'd make it much harder for Starmer to kind of continue to hold that line when Israel was, like a total rogue state using nuclear weapons. I think it would be impossible for Keir Starmer's government to stand unless it actually kind of sanctioned and cut all relations with Israel in those circumstances. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that their situation is already perilous on the Palestine thing. I mean, they've put Palestine Action, call them a terrorist group for spray painting an aircraft, which just doesn't sort of. Goodness me, I can think of some worse terrorism acts than that. But again, that seems to me more a free speech issue than a terrorism issue. I think how they can possibly describe that as terrorism. But I think that the issue really is, as you say, it's not just about Israel. It's about our relationship with Americans. It's about our relationship with the world. And I think I can think of nothing worse than supporting the use of tactical nuclear weapons under some pretext. Yeah, we've done this before against weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and been proven wrong. So I would imagine that it will not be that difficult, or would not take that long before the truth actually comes out. The truth is that there are many reasons why the Iranians have been very cautious about going toward nuclear weapons. I mean, the fact that Netanyahu has been warning that it's only 2 weeks away for the last 30 years tells us something. He's on the public record as well of these warnings, going back for 28 years, I think, that the Iranians are only two weeks away. So I think that at that stage, you've got to think of British national interests and British national security. And the key thing there is to act. Sorry, we're getting a bit of feedback in. But the key thing there is to act in a way which is in accordance with British national interest. And it's, to me, unless you will, you're more experienced in that than me, but to me, not in British national interest to support the use of tactical nuclear weapons by anybody.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it should be in British national interest to promote peace through a diplomatic dialogue, but that doesn't actually appear to be the line that this government takes. And indeed, actually, in fairness to them, the Conservative government took before they came to power. So I think actually governments generally, certainly the British government, has lost sight of the need to kind of root foreign policy in core strategic interests of Britain. And they will always be the three core ones, maintaining the territorial integrity of the Union, United Kingdom, keeping British people safe, and promoting the prosperity of British people. I mean, they are the kind of the basics, and it feels to me that we've lost track of those, quite significantly. On the territorial integrity, we're being invaded constantly by refugees. Got no ideas what to do about that in terms of keeping people safe. All our actions in Ukraine actually, arguably, just making people less safe because the risk of war, which Barron's has now said is, we could be at war by 2030. Next time we hear from him, it may be next week. Who knows that we're going to be at war? We're getting these warnings all the time, and it's certainly making us poorer. So,
Yeah.
none of the foreign policy actions or indeed domestic policy actions we seem to take actually appear to be in the core strategic interests of the United Kingdom.
I mean, one of the really interesting questions, and you'll know this better than me, and I suspect him Puddicks as well, is the extent to which those what ought to be the core strategic interests have been sort of put on one side for what seems to be the core defence interest, is maintaining the relationship with America, whatever comes. And that to me is a major mistake. So if that translates into supporting America in whatever the circumstance, that's a change in foreign policy in many ways, because it wasn't the case that there's something we did during the Vietnam War, and thank God we didn't. And I would think that we would be a better friend to the Americans of explaining when we weren't going to go with them and why, rather than just going with them like vassals.
But you see, the thing is, a relationship isn't a strategic interest. It's just a relationship, or it's just an objective. It's just a foreign policy objective. So many things that are really just objectives or policies actually get interpreted as core interests when they're absolutely not. Values is another one. Values is absolutely not a core strategic interest. There's no way you could describe values in the way that makes it look or feel like a core strategic interest of the UK, because how do you even identify what sort of UK values are in such a diverse society that we have? So people get confused about what core strategic interests are. There's something that should be very simple to describe, very tangible, and something very real and relatable to ordinary citizens of the country.
Yeah.
Hey, Ian. Do we have you back?
I'm moving because I can't hear you. I just can't hear a word.
Okay. When I was writing strategy, we're talking about strategic interests, Ian. When I was writing strategy for action, I quoted George Kennan at length, who actually did a long piece. I quoted it with quite a long paragraph in which he actually said that the core strategic interests are slightly different to the ones you mentioned, but similar. So he said the two core strategic interests of America was to keep its people safe and free on the territorial land of America, and the other was to do its best to further the interests of American people abroad. So, and he came at that with a very clear deduction of how he got to it. Now, I didn't necessarily agree with everything, but I just like the way he did it, in the same way that you've just done it on what Britain's core strategic interests are. Because we do seem to have lost sight of it. I mean, it's clear that we've lost sight of it through our actions.
But do we learn? Exactly. Do we learn anything from this?
Well, no, because there's no real challenge. There's no real debate, in the United Kingdom, and that's partly going back to kind of Steve's very good Eisenhower quote about the need for a well-informed public. The fact that the public isn't well-informed, the public is largely kept in the dark about things that are happening on the world stage and pummeled with kind of propaganda, not only by the BBC but by other sort of privately owned mainstream media channels. So there's no effective challenge. Parliamentary democracy, is arguably a bit of a myth, quite frankly, in the UK. At least as it relates to kind of foreign policy rather than necessarily domestic policy. That's my view. What do you think?
Well, I was going to ask the question to that. So, talking about parliamentary democracy, I mean, JD Vance, was it 6 months ago or so, came over and gave the Europeans a lecture and said, "We want you to be partners. We want you to challenge us. We want you to talk to us. We want to share ideas. We don't want you just to say yes and be vassals. Stop being vassals." Putting your diplomatic head on, Ian, I mean, how would that have gone down with the likes of Keir Starmer and government and the I was going to say the Foreign Office, but just really the civil service? How would they have taken that?
Well, I mean, it's a painful and uncomfortable truth that our behaviour suggests that we've become like vassals over the past kind of 2 or so decades with the United States, certainly since 9/11. But I think actually, if you know anything about how the government works and how certainly the Foreign Office works, all the briefing to ministers would have basically, been like a parent briefing an upset child. That actually, oh, don't worry, they were just being nasty and mean, and actually, what you're doing is perfectly fine. So I think my sense is actually that sort of briefing to Keir Starmer, to David Lammy and others would have been sort of indignant, slightly kind of haughty, saying, well, it's just, these nasty kind of Americans under Trump's kind of clownish regime that have come in and said hurty words to us. But actually what we're doing is perfectly fine. I would be very surprised if briefing, albeit crafted in more serious terms than that would have been the basic message of briefing, that actually they're just being mean and just ignore them because what we're doing is right. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I've sort of seen it. I operate in a private office. I've got the top of defence with the chief of defence staff, so I watch the way this is done. And sometimes it can be quite measured and thoughtful. Other times it's sort of very random. And this is a slightly off-subject story, but it gives you a sense of it. I think was chief of defence staff. It's his private secretary. Lost you for a second. Principal staff officer, and I got a call from number 10, and it was from Jonathan Powell, as I recall, who I think was the chief of staff at the time. He said, right, we want to send a division to Lebanon. I said, okay, Mr. Powell. Well, we've only got one that's going to be deployed at the moment, and it's split between Iraq and Afghanistan. So which of those two places do you want us to start drawing down from? No, we don't want to do that. I said, well, actually, a division is 50,000 troops. It'll probably take us such and such a time. So, well, how about a brigade? I said, well, there are a brigade, broadly speaking, we're a brigade or two brigades in Iraq and something like that in Afghanistan. I said, well, again, we'll still have to start drawing down those places. He said, how about a battalion? I said, well, we can probably start to do that. But I said, what is it you want to achieve?
How about a platoon?
Do you want to achieve? Do you want to achieve?
It's like Dad's army.
True story. Do you want to achieve something? Yes, I know. Do you want to achieve some sort of military effect or some political effect? He said, yeah. We want to show the British doing something. I said, well, my advice is that let's send a couple of frigates and send an RAF squadron to Cyprus as a demonstration of over the seas potential to intervene if we wanted to. And that's what we did. So we're a little bit more complicated than that, frankly. But it's that inability to connect the British armed forces and their capabilities to what it is that politicians want to achieve. But that was sad to see from a very senior and experienced civil servant. But there we are.
And what year was that?
It would have been 2005 or 6 or something. We were heavily involved. Yeah, we were heavily involved in Iraq, heavily involved in Afghanistan, and struggling in Iraq at the time, really struggling in Iraq. So the idea that we're going to would take our only deployable division from both places. Anyway, fortunately, there was a bit of military advice, and we did no more than provide a show of force, which was what was needed. We would never have been able to do anything on the ground anyway. So, it's a disappointing lack of understanding of strategy.
And just for a normal person, so I was going to say, just for a normal person on the street, that's just the normal mum and dad that's listening to this now, can you just explain what a brigade is and a battalion? Yeah. Because how many men and women is that?
Yeah, so a battalion is the sort of unit. It's the unit of sort of currency in a way. So it's about 600 men. It's got 3 rifle companies in it and a load of other people who do supporting things. And you can actually group those into, generally speaking, it's 3 battalions in a brigade, although it can be 4, in which case it tends to be known as a square brigade as opposed to a triangular brigade. And those could be a mixture of an armoured unit and 2 infantry, or vice versa, whatever it wants you want to make it up. And then a division is usually about 3 brigades, but that's a lot for Britain to actually deploy a division. The last time we deployed a division was, so that would be when I talked about a brigade, it's not just the 3 fighting units, it's probably another 600 to 1,000 depending on you want, so it gives you a sort of sense of where we are.
If that call came down today, considering we're on a war footing with Russia, technically speaking, and with all the rhetoric and propaganda, that phone call comes through today, realistically, I I appreciate you're no longer there, but where do you think we are now when that phone call comes through?
I would guess
no pressure, Steve.
Yeah, I would guess some preparations been made, but I think the key issue is well, there are 2 key issues. Firstly, the largest we could ever consider deploying, and the only way I'd deploy it is in a peacekeeping context, which we never find in the first place. But to deploy a warfighting brigade, I would be surprised if we could do it in 2 months, and that's guessing that we could support it with all the logistics that it needs. Another funny story was that when the Kosovo campaign was running, people said, "Okay, we need to deploy." I think it was a brigade quickly. This is a sort of it's a second-hand story, but it's a good one. We need to deploy a brigade quickly. Let's get it in by air. And people were saying, "Well, just a second. This brigade got quite a lot of heavy kit." So, okay, well, let's do that. We've got a lot of Hercules aircraft. How long will it take? They did the maths. It was going to take 50 years. And the reason is that they've got so much heavy stuff. So the heavy stuff, like tanks, has to go by sea. So if you're going to do anything like that, you're going to do it by train overland from Europe or somehow into the Black Sea. So it takes time, and it's a lot of heavy stuff by sea, because 90% of Britain's imports come by sea. And the primary reason that it's heavy is so it's bloody expensive to fly it, even if you could fly it. So, it's these basic things which people have very little understanding of with our politicians. And one of the most important things to help educate our politicians in the first place.
Yeah. I was going to say, after the tsunami in 2004 in Thailand, I went down to Krabi on about day 3 after it had happened. I deployed on the day that the tsunami happened, but ended up in Krabi on day 3, and there were like hundreds and hundreds of people stuck in the town, and the hospital, which was completely rammed, and the German military had sent a fully staffed military hospital aircraft with like surgical beds on it and all sorts. Even Belgium had sent a kind of C-130. The place was complete pandemonium, and there were 2 tasks: get everybody who could walk out and back into a bigger city like Bangkok, and to get the seriously injured medical care and medically evacuated as soon as possible through kind of some sort of airlift. And I phoned up London saying, actually, we could really use one of the C-130s that's in Afghanistan right now. And they said, well, you're going to need to put in a business case for that. But no, I'm not joking at all. I was the only British diplomat there amongst hundreds of people with all sorts of, quite frankly, horrendous injuries, not to mention about 400 or 500 dead bodies that were kind of mounting up in this Chinese temple in the middle of the town. Can we have a C-130? Please fill out the forms and we'll think about it. And that was the answer that I got. So I gave up. Yeah. There you are. We need to educate. I like that. We need to educate our politicians better. But how do we do that? A politician. George Galloway. Well, what does he think? Get him on here. We can ask him. How can we educate our politicians better?
Okay. He'll be our next guest. He'll be our next guest.
But what do you think? I mean, how do we educate the politicians? Because he does seem to read around stuff. Most politicians I see on all sides, frankly, because I'm a political, seem to be pretty clueless.
I mean, government isn't a new institution, for GB Limited or Great Britain. So, why are we in this mess? Why are we in this mess? It just beggars belief.
Yeah. I think part of the problem is the whole architecture and philosophy of spin, and I think actually that as soon as spin doctors got in amongst how we did things, and that was done predominantly, in fact, almost completely, for political reasons. And I mean political reasons. So governments of all cloths and colours were using spin to start to actually improve their narrative, and PR agencies and such. And at that stage, you start to sort of see a move from honest reporting and honest thing coming out to lines to take, which would support a general narrative. And I think that's happening all over the West, I'm afraid to say. I don't think we're alone in this at all. The only exception possibly is America, because things are so chaotic over there. But throughout the West of Europe, I think we're seeing spin and narrative dominating clear thinking and public education, I'm afraid.
Couldn't agree more. So on the chaos, we probably wrap up on the chaos of the United States of America. So we've got 50 days before Trump is going to impose 100% secondary tariffs on any country that does business, with Russia. What are both of your predictions about where we're going to be in 50 days from now? Is he going to pull the trigger? How do you see it play out?
He's walked back on most of all his tariffs so far. And I can't remember if it was Colonel Larry Wilkerson. Oh, it was one of the guests on Judge Napolitano's wonderful show, which all three of us would wholeheartedly encourage everybody to watch. It's essential viewing as far as I think we're all concerned. One of the guests was saying, how did Trump work out the tariffs on each country? Now, I think I don't want to speak for the three of us, but I feel that I can, and I'm sure you'll put me right if I'm wrong, and I would welcome that, as you know. Did he sit down with some figures and some real analysis and work out what the appropriate tariff would be on each country? One of the guests said he just thought what was appropriate and imposed it. I mean, it's like Alice in Wonderland politics. I mean, the impacts, and reverberations, are still felt sometime after the impact of after the implementation of these crazy sanctions, and he made them up.
Yeah,
I mean, such a genius and has such immense self-belief.
And the key point is he then rode back on them once already.
Yeah, I think I've skim read your article, Ian, in Responsible Statecraft. It looked really, really good. But my sort of sense was, as soon as I saw the 50 days, I thought, okay, this is an attempt at negotiation. What he's doing on the one hand, he's keeping his neocons at bay by saying, yeah, don't worry, we're going to do the massive sanctions on it. He's providing weapons, except they're only defensive weapons. So, of course, it's just going to slow the Russians down but not stop them. But actually, he's hoping, and it's against hope, that Putin's going to say, oh, crikey, terrible sanctions, therefore I'm going to give in and give in to all your things and we'll have a ceasefire. I think there's no chance in hell that Putin will do it. I think he's clearly winning. He's just going to keep going. And if the Americans don't like it, well, bad luck. And of course, then if you want to use Russia to help you with Iran, well, bad luck too on that, because why would Russia help you if you're trying to shut down the Russian economy? My strong suspicion, if the oil price survives below, I don't know, $60 to $70 a barrel, but my strong suspicion is that the tariffs will have more boomerang impact on the West than they will on the rest of the global South and the rest of the world. But I'll know more when I've read your article, Ian.
So how I see it playing out is that unless Trump can force out of Zelensky himself, but also the European Commission, Mark Rutte, and key European heads of government and state like Macron and Keir Starmer, an acceptance that Ukraine is, and a clear statement that Ukraine is never going to join sort of NATO, and some clear articulation of that concessions are being offered, then Putin just won't see it in his interest to cut for peace, whether it's 50 days or beyond 50 days, whether or not Trump decides to apply tariffs on on China, which in any case I think is going to massively fail, as you've just said. So, yeah, I think Putin is going to sit back and wait to see what Trump does with the Europeans and Zelensky. And if he doesn't get any movement, and we spent 11 years not putting any pressure on the Ukrainians to make concessions, towards peace. And I think Zelensky has just announced today that he wants to extend martial law, and conscription through to November. So that's a sign of where he's at. Right now I see no evidence, the Europeans or Zelensky will want to kind of make concessions on NATO membership, in which case in 50 days time, Trump will be forced to, impose these tariffs and end up looking really, really weak and having negative economic consequences for the USA. So, I mean, I think this is just making him look more like an amateur as every day passes, I fear. And I don't see that it's going to add any more increment of pressure on Putin than has been the case for the past 11 years.
Well, he lives for the headline, doesn't he? The great PR headline, his big, beautiful deal, which is taking the 37 trillion that the US are in debt to. Is it another 5 or 6 trillion, or is it 8 trillion that he's able to increase it by?
What's a few trillion between friends?
Yeah. Maybe we should have this discussion in the group. But yes, he lives for the headlines. I mean, America was at war with the Houthis for 30 days. I think they spent was it just under it was billions anyway. I mean, it's a significant amount of money.
Yeah, it's a short.
And then 30 days later, they stopped.
Exactly. It's that short attention span and that inability to kind of follow something through with real kind of focus and leadership. And I think he just doesn't seem to have the attention span or really the interest or really the kind of strategic sort of plan in his head across, whether it's Iran, whether it's kind of Russia, Ukraine, whether it's kind of US, China, whatever, Taiwan, whatever it may be. He just doesn't have the attention span to kind of do anything meaningful across these theatres. And I think for that reason, his foreign policy is going to be as much of a mess as it was during his first term.
I think that's another good reason that and sadly we're not in this situation, but what he needs at the moment is good friends abroad who can tell him the truth.
Well, that's
and actually, and all the European leaders could be in a position to know this. I mean, they may still be seduced by this ridiculous narrative, but really a good friend abroad. I mean, they often say that the two people who could have stopped the second Iraq war were Colin Powell and Tony Blair, and Tony Blair didn't, and shame on him.
Yeah, shame on him.
You mentioned.
Yes,
just one more point. You said about having good friends abroad. Well, Trump's got plenty of good friends in the States, but he doesn't listen to them.
That's a very good point.
Colonel McGregor was saying again on Judge Napolitano's podcast, only in the last few weeks, he was recalling that when Trump had just got in, he got a phone call from the Trump team down in Mar-a-Lago and asked him for his analysis on what's happening in Ukraine, and he was able to give some analysis and provide the number of dead Ukrainians, dead and injured, 1 million plus. And the person at the end of the phone laughed and said, "Well, that's not what we're hearing here." So Trump's being badly advised. But they're choices that he's made for whatever reason. I mean, that Colonel Danny Davis, friend, our personal friend, Professor Mearsheimer, Professor Sachs. I mean, there's plenty of really, or just brilliant people. It's the only way to describe them, brilliant people. And they're just ignored.
Yeah. Well, they suffer from something which none of his advisors suffer from, which is prescience. They've actually got the chance to get things right in their forecast, which none of his advisors ever had.
No.
On which note, we
on
probably should bring it to one, shall we?
Great to see you guys. I'm sorry.
Likewise. Yeah, good to see you both.
There, but it was a great conversation anyway. I really, really enjoyed it. So let's get some guests on. Let's get George on. Let's get Wilkerson on. Let's get Danny on.
Yeah.
You know,
Let's get Danny on. Be great.
We've all been incredibly busy, but let's try and make more of a regular thing of this. Really enjoy these conversations we have.
Okay.
Apologies for the tech problems at my end. I do apologise.
Yeah, no problems, Ian. We'll see you
Thank
soon.
you. Cheers.
See you soon.
Bye. Bye.
Good night, chaps. Hi, it's Ian from the Rebel Realists. Thank you ever so much for watching our podcast. Please could you like and subscribe and share? It will really help us try and get the message out.